So, you know the story as it goes, the life of the Buddha. He has mastered the jhanas. That didn't work. He has practiced the extreme of austerity. That also didn't work. In terms of cultivating the qualities, having some skill at concentration and considerable skill at concentration and considerable skill at determination, obviously, he did use those skills in his striving under the Bodhi tree, when, as it's explained, he was able to recollect 5,000 past lives and seeing the anicca, dukkha, anatta. It'd be pretty amazing, wouldn't it, to have this laser-like mind that could see one birth, aging, death, another birth, aging, death, another birth, aging, death, sometimes animal, sometimes deva, sometimes hell, sometimes human. And the insight is there's no permanent, unchanging self there. It's all being recycled, these 5 khandhas, depending on karma. And he saw lots of dukkha, and he saw lots of anicca, and no abiding self. So he was liberated, and then he considered who he could teach, and he considered the first 2 teachers that taught him the Arupa jhanas. He saw that they were both already reborn as Brahmadevas, and they were not in a state where they could be receptive to teachings. Their mind was absorbed in vast radiance. Then he remembered the 5 disciples who were practicing austerity with him, and the ones that abandoned him. It's an interesting, I always make note of this, when the Bodhisattva had the correct perception that taking enough sustenance and having a bath was a middle way, and his friends rejected him and abandoned him and called him one who was reverting to luxury. So it's not, you don't expect sometimes in your life when you're doing the right thing that everyone around you will applaud. Here we have the example of the Bodhisattva who was rejected by his best friends when he had a correct and accurate insight. Sometimes in this path we have to go alone for periods of time, trusting our intuition, respecting our conviction. He realized that those 5 disciples did have the spiritual faculties, the spiritual powers, that they would comprehend the teaching. So he walked in stages to the deer park. He taught the Dhammacakka Sutta, a sutta which contains the 4 Noble Truths, the Eightfold Path, during which Anya Kondanya became a stream-enterer. In the following days it is said that he taught the Anatta-lakkhana Sutta, the Sutta on not self. And it goes like this. At one time the Blessed One was dwelling at Benares in the deer park, and there he addressed the group of 5 bhikkhus. Form, bhikkhus, is not self. If, bhikkhus, form were self, then form would not lead to affliction, and one might be able to say in regard to form, let my form be thus, let my form not be thus. But since, bhikkhus, form is not self, form therefore leads to affliction, and one is not able to say in regard to form, let my form be thus, let my form not be thus. So it's true, isn't it? Average age in this retreat, a couple of young people, but a lot of people will understand the body is aging. Can you will it to be younger? Can you just decide not to have knee pain, not to have arthritis? It only goes one way, doesn't it? You can go and get expensive surgery and have the skin tightened around the aging body, but the organs are still old, the bones are still old. Feeling is not self. If bhikkhus feeling was self, feeling would not lead to affliction, and one might be able to say in regard to feeling, let my feeling be thus, let my feeling not be thus. But since bhikkhus feeling is not self, feeling therefore leads to affliction, and one is not able to say in regard to feeling, let my feeling be thus, let my feeling not be thus. So we have this habit of grasping at the whole experience of body and mind as being a self, and here Lord Buddha is separating it out, helping these advanced spiritual practitioners to focus in this way. And it's true, when you come to sit, you never know if it's going to be peaceful or difficult, really, unless you're at the advanced stages and you're truly adept. You're never quite sure if it's going to be blissful, serene, tranquil, or challenging. You never know what emotions will arise. You never quite know how much knee pain or back pain may manifest. Can't really control it. Perception is not self. If bhikkhus' perception were self, perception would not lead to affliction, and one might be able to say in regard to perception, let my perception be thus, let my perception not be thus. But since bhikkhus' perception is not self, perception therefore leads to affliction, and one is not able to say in regard to perception, let my perception be thus, let my perception not be thus. Mental formations are not self. If bhikkhus' mental formations were self, mental formations would not lead to affliction, and one might be able to say in regard to mental formations, let my mental formations be thus, let my mental formations not be thus. But since bhikkhus' mental formations are not self, mental formations therefore lead to affliction, and one is not able to say in regard to mental formations, let my mental formations be thus, let my mental formations not be thus. Lastly, consciousness is not self. If bhikkhus' consciousness were self, consciousness would not lead to affliction, and one might be able to say in regard to consciousness, let my consciousness be thus, let my consciousness not be thus. But since bhikkhus' consciousness is not self, consciousness therefore leads to affliction, and one is not able to say in regard to consciousness, let my consciousness be thus, let my consciousness not be thus. So when Lord Buddha talks about consciousness, we can't yet see this, but he explains that there is consciousness at the eyes, ears, nose, tongue, and body, and mind sense doors. And when sense contact occurs, a sound occurs at the ear, consciousness arises and ceases, aware of that sound. Then in the mind, I like that sound, I don't like that sound, as a different kind of consciousness related to past sanya. He can see all that, we can't see all of that. But if we would choose only pleasant consciousness, right? We say pleasant sounds, pleasant sights, pleasant tastes, pleasant reactions, pleasant mind states, and enter the jhanas at will or what have you. Most people, Lord Buddha describes the situation as being like of having the six sense spaces and an untrained mind. He says it's like a cow without skin being landed on by flies. This constant impingement of a sensitivity that has to feel all these things. And so then Lord Buddha asks the bhikkhus to contemplate directly. What do you think about this, bhikkhus? Is form permanent or impermanent? Impermanent, Lord. But is that which is impermanent painful or pleasurable? Painful, Lord. But is it fit to consider that which is impermanent, painful, of a nature to change, as this is mine, I am this is myself? It is not, Lord. What do you think about this, bhikkhus? Is feeling permanent or impermanent? Impermanent, Lord. But is that which is impermanent, painful or pleasurable? Painful, Lord. But is it fit to consider that which is impermanent, painful, of a nature to change, as this is mine, I am this is myself? It is not, Lord. What do you think about this, bhikkhus? Is perception permanent or impermanent? Impermanent, Lord. But is that which is impermanent, painful or pleasurable? Painful, Lord. But is it fit to consider that which is impermanent, painful, of a nature to change, as this is mine, I am this is myself? It is not, Lord. What do you think about this, bhikkhus? Are mental formations permanent or impermanent? Impermanent, Lord. But is that which is impermanent, painful or pleasurable? Painful, Lord. But is it fit to consider that which is impermanent, painful, of a nature to change, as this is mine, I am this is myself? It is not, Lord. What do you think about this, bhikkhus? Is consciousness permanent or impermanent? Impermanent, Lord. But is that which is impermanent, painful or pleasurable? Painful, Lord. But is it fit to consider that which is impermanent, painful, of a nature to change, as this is mine, I am this is myself? It is not, Lord. So, going through the khandhas, Body? Can you control it? Nope. Is it self? No. Feelings, perceptions, consciousness. So these spiritual practitioners were advanced. They were able to keep that same austere standards that the Bodhisattva was keeping. And so they were really paying attention to this. And as we know, by the end of the sutta, they were all arahants, but the Lord Buddha instructs them to comprehend these things in this manner. Wherefore, bhikkhus, whatever form there is, past, future, present, internal or external, gross or subtle, inferior or superior, whether it is far or near, all forms should, by means of right wisdom, be seen as it really is thus. This is not mine, I am not this is not myself. Whatever feeling there is, past, future, present, internal or external, gross or subtle, inferior or superior, whether it is far or near, all feeling should, by means of right wisdom, be seen as it really is thus. This is not mine, I am not this is not myself. Whatever perception there is, past, future, present, internal or external, gross or subtle, inferior or superior, whether it is far or near, all perceptions, mental formations. Yes, all perceptions should be seen as it really is by means of right wisdom. This is not mine, I am not this is not myself. Whatever mental formations there are, past, future, present, internal or external, gross or subtle, inferior or superior, whether they are far or near, all mental formations should be, by means of right wisdom, be seen as they really are thus. This is not mine, I am not this is not myself. Lastly, whatever consciousness there is, past, future, present, internal or external, gross or subtle, inferior or superior, whether far or near, all consciousness should, by means of right wisdom, be seen as it really is thus. This is not mine, I am not this is not myself. You see the habit that we have of grasping at it all as one kind of conglomerate mass as being a self. And Lord Buddha has helped the bhikkhus to separate with their mindfulness forms, feelings, consciousness, perception, and instructed them, stop doing this, stop assuming it's a self. I'm asking you to see it as not such, because it's impermanent, you have no control of it, it's unsatisfactory. Seeing in this way, bhikkhus, the wise, noble disciple becomes disenchanted with form, becomes disenchanted with feeling, becomes disenchanted with perception, becomes disenchanted with mental formations, becomes disenchanted with consciousness. Becoming disenchanted, their passions fade away. With the fading of passion, the heart is liberated. With liberation there comes the knowledge, it is liberated, and they know, destroyed is birth, the holy life has been lived, done is what had to be done, there is no more coming into any state of being. Thus spoke the Blessed One, delighted the group of 5 bhikkhus, rejoiced in what the Lord had said. Moreover, while this discourse was being delivered, the minds of the 5 bhikkhus were freed from the defilements through clinging no more. So, there were 5 more arahants in the world. This last paragraph is, I often mention it in my teachings because it's very interesting and instructive. Disenchanted. A lot of people, the Dalai Lama wrote that book, The Art of Happiness, and a lot of people think that spiritual practice is about becoming happier and happier. And it's a nibbida, nibbindati. Weariness, disenchantment has a very important role to play. And I think it's the same reason Lord Buddha puts the dukkha, First Noble Truth, first. As long as we're committed to trying to squeeze sukha out of everything, pleasure, we won't have a really good look at dukkha. He says you have to know it. Dukkha is to be known, because this is what happens. When you see just how much dukkha there is, how much dukkha permeates everything, it's a characteristic of conditions, the mind becomes disenchanted, it becomes weary, and it sobers up. And this is actually an important step, because if there's various ways of looking at this and various lists. One is called the outflows, the asavas, kama asava, bhava asava, the outflowing of the mind into the world, seeking pleasant experiences, seeking becoming. But that leads to rebirth and death and rebirth and death. And so when we see dukkha clearly, what happens is that we're kind of sobered and we stop doing that. And that energy which is flowing out into the darkness of the world and darkening the mind comes back. The weariness plays an important role in sobering and in the energy coming back within the parameters of the body. And then dispassion arises, which is the opposite of passion. So for the craving for pleasant experiences, aversion to unpleasant experiences, craving for becoming, even wanting to become a Tushita Deva, a Brahma Deva, an enlightened being. There's some bhava there. And aspiration is different, of course. Aspiration is the wholesome aspect of the becoming. But this sentence, I'll read it in Pali as well. Rupasaming pini bindati, Vedanaya pini bindati, Sanyaya pini bindati, Sankharesu pini bindati, Vinyanasaming pini bindati. So, becoming weary of those forms, feelings, perceptions, formations, consciousness. Nibbidang virajati, viraga, vimuchati. Viraga, dispassion. Becoming dispassionate. And then the next sentence is, becoming disenchanted, their passions fade away. You can see, by not following on your passions, by being sober, by staying still, by looking at it and seeing the way it is, by not flowing out into the world, with the fading of passion, the heart is liberated. It's very interesting that these three things are so close together: weariness, dispassion, purification, liberation. So if ever you find that you feel spiritually weary, it's not necessarily a bad thing. If ever you find that in noticing dukkha that there's some kind of a quality of some kind, sometimes referred to as samvega, sadness, spiritual sadness, it's also not a bad thing. And I was experiencing as a young bhikkhu living with Ajahn Anan a quality of sadness that I was actually a bit scared of, because I was meditating and my heart would become so sad, and I would try to make my mind bigger, and the sadness would fill that space, and I would try to make the mindfulness bigger, and the sadness would fill that space, and it felt like sadness filled the sky. But the sadness was so big it kind of crushed the self. So it was just sadness. And it wasn't depression. There was a quality of peacefulness, and I was confused about it. So I asked Ajahn Anan, and he said, "Oh, good, very good. This is a form of rapture associated with correct seeing. It's like seeing the nature of the world. It is a sad place. Lord Buddha refers to it as the realm of death. And Buddhists, we're looking at that truthfully. And when the mind really begins to get it, the nature of the conditions, when the mind gets it, that sadness led to a beautiful quality of sobriety, and he just said, just keep sitting with it until the mind becomes peaceful. And so I did, and the mind would become very peaceful. It's kind of like a delicious sadness. And so once I finally learned how to work with it, I stopped experiencing it. It's very interesting. And now I sometimes miss it. Because it was so pristine and sober and very nice. It used to lead to a very lovely sense of peacefulness. What happens is the longer the monks keep the virtuous precepts and encourage other people and cultivate metta, you can start to feel a deva-like quality of happiness. So this is when the merit in your mind keeps the mind happy. And Luang Por Chah says that can be an obstruction for spiritual practitioners. The happiness that comes from dana and sila, where you have a consistent deva-like joy, is an obstruction for further growth. Because people can get apathetic and content with it. So he said this is why we have to investigate more, because more suffering is definitely coming. So at the end of this sutta, the 5 bhikkhus are liberated. Why is that, do you think? It's because their 5 spiritual powers have been cultivated, made much of. They have very strong faith, very strong energy, strong mindfulness, concentration and wisdom. I also deduced that they made vows in past lives to be the first disciples of the Buddha, so they were ready for some time, and they delayed their liberation. When we look at what Lord Buddha describes as the 3 ways of cultivating wisdom, there's studying and listening, suttamaya panya. Then there's the contemplation. Does this really make sense? Consider it. Is it logical? Does it make sense? Bhavanamaya panya. And then there's the 3rd type of panya, chittamaya panya, which is the direct insight, the deep insight coming from the meditative discipline. So the reason these 5 bhikkhus, skilled meditators, are able to liberate their minds while listening to this is they're working with that 3rd level. Lord Buddha is instructing them, and they're doing the bhavana. They're really identifying, okay, there's a sense of self attached with this, oh, don't do that, they can let it go. Strong mindfulness, strong stability. All these perceptions that I've been grasping at as being a self, oh, don't do that, oh, I can see that, yes, it is suffering, they can let it go. Lord Buddha, even consciousness, very difficult for most people to contemplate the way we are attached to consciousness, but these Olympic grade spiritual practitioners can. Lord Buddha says, see that, don't do that, and see it with clear wisdom thus, this is not mine, I am not this is not myself. When they let go of that grasping, they're enlightened. But we shouldn't think, because when we read it, or we chant it, or we hear it, that we don't get enlightened, that it's not working. Basically, we're working on those first 2 in the initial stages. We're studying it, we're listening, we're contemplating it. And then in retreat circumstances, you may have insights into it. So there's the 3 types of wisdom, and we keep plugging away, and they do work. It's just a matter of when those 5 powers are powerful enough. The mindfulness is clear enough, the samadhi is stable enough, we will have the same insight, and the mind will be liberated similarly. So I wish you success in this process, and rejoice in your practice. Please keep continuing to practice. May you be one of the noble ones.